we have to do a lot as leaders to sort of promote that sort of cultural change, because it's
Yes.
not oppositional to being a good lawyer or making a lot of money. I think you can be a good lawyer and do great work and make a lot of money and not just like shred through people and have people hide themselves. I think it's actually like a win-win-win. But I think it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Welcome back to the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. In this week's episode, join Michael Kahn for part 2 of a discussion with Mike Kasdan about his refreshing approach to lawyering, which includes self-awareness, vulnerability, authenticity, and humane leadership.
It's mindfulness.
I think it's really training your brain to work optimally, and I think that includes taking spaces. But I think there's a lot of science behind it. There's a course that I'm taking now online at Coursera. I read about it in the New York Times article recently. It's called The Science of Happiness. It's being offered
Yale.
by a Yale professor.
Is it Yale, right?
Yeah, it's up at Yale. It's online. It's the most popular course in the history of Yale. And I think the really important part is, I think when people think about mental health and wellness, they either think about people are really acutely sick with depression or anxiety, or PTSD or bipolar disorder. They're really the sick side. And when you're talking about thriving, right? The opposite of, right? Like, so mental health is not is not the opposite of mental illness. It's thriving.
Right.
And so I think that the really important point that course makes, and that I think we have to make, is it's not just making sure that we can deal with those situations. That's important, of course. Having gone through that situation, I think it's important to deal with those situations when they occur. But it's also, the other side of it, people think is like, okay, it's people saying, breathe better and do yoga better and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And there's this huge like other space in between where it's like, well, no, we're talking about creativity and making your brain function well. And I've had this conversation a few times. I think there's this identity problem, misconception. It's like, it's intertwined with this masculinity stuff we've been talking about, because people will say, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm a soldier, right? I'm going off to war, I'm beating people.
Warrior.
I got to be tough. And I've actually had these conversations with people. I've had it online on LinkedIn, because now I'm actually on LinkedIn talking about this stuff, and I never was. Where I'm saying, no, hold on. Like, you're not a soldier. Soldiers are soldiers. Like, you're a partner at a law firm in Utah. All right, you're doing IP, and of course, like, winning is important, and it's at stakes. But in 95 or more percent of the case, the most important skill as a lawyer is being a creative problem solver, right? You're going to be an ally to business. You're going to find a solution. You're going to resolve disputes. And to be a creative problem solver effectively, you have to have a brain that functions well. And I think mindfulness and all the stuff we're talking about, there's science behind it that shows like you're actually training your brain to just function better. You're more creative. You have better energy. And I think, if people looked at it that way, I think just the word mindfulness, by the time I say ness and mindfulness, I think 80% of people are like on to the next thing because they have this image of it. So maybe we just need a different word for it.
Well,
but it's really brain training.
Yeah, and really it is, and you're right. I mean, the word mindfulness has been kind of used so much, and it ad nauseum, that
It's very busy.
can lose its meaning. But to me, it's the synonym for mindfulness is self-awareness.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's great.
And it's all about, and I know you know this, but it's about just being aware of the present moment, right now. Like, as I'm talking to you, Mike, how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What is my body telling me? And then that gives you the opportunity at that moment to make a choice, to make a different choice often than your automatic choices when you're facing, particularly when you're facing adversity and difficult situations. So and you brought that all up earlier when you're talking about what's helped you with your depression, which is being aware of your at the time your tendencies, like
Right.
people pleasing, like similarly not saying no, like putting your needs last. But once you have that awareness, then that's where you have all the power, right? Because then you can start to make changes. Even it takes a while, of course, but you can start to make changes.
Yeah, if you're not aware, like self-awareness is a beautiful thing. sort of constant struggle. It's kind of our human condition, I guess.
Hmm.
Maybe it's what makes it interesting to be human. But the word choice is something that like my therapist uses a lot, and she's great. And I think what a lot of young people struggle with, and what a lot of young lawyers struggle with is, and I try to speak about this when I talk to law students, is they feel like they don't have a lot of choice, but they actually have a lot more
And
choice
young
than
and young
art. Yeah,
associates too, the
absolutely.
other way. Hmm.
I would much rather a young associate communicate to me and say, hey, I've got to watch my kids for these 2 hours. So that thing you asked for, I'm going to get it to you, but it's going to be at this time, instead of not saying anything and just saying, I got to pound this out for Mike.
And you'd be okay with that, Mike,
Yeah,
if
I,
someone said that to
for
you?
me, absolutely. I mean, look, there are times in everyone's life and career where there's a deadline, and it has to be.
Right.
But for me, like communicating and doing something effectively, and that goes for me too. So if I'm leaving the office at 7 o'clock and doing family stuff, I certainly don't want someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to get it to you tonight," and getting it to me at 10 o'clock, and I'm sleeping. I'll usually say, "I'm not going to look at this until Tuesday because I've got these other
Right.
things going." I think communication goes a long way. And I also think, part of what I really want to talk about with Lawyering While Human is also like authenticity. Bringing your whole self to work. I really think that, and it ties in with diversity, because I think what makes us special,
Yes.
is our diverse experiences and backgrounds and passions and interests. And I think a lot of people, especially in law firms, they come to work and they say, okay, whatever I am outside, I've got to be that like button down lawyer, and I got to like put on the suit and button it up and talk a certain way and write a certain way, and you kind of forget all of who you are. When to me, that's the creative. That's like the best part. And so I
Yeah.
think that's another aspect. So one thing, the Lawyering While Human, the name comes from a presentation I did in 2016 that I'd actually kind of forgotten about, but it was a really great opportunity I had. And I had this friend who got me. I was like a last minute substitute speaker for this bar conference, and he knew I wrote for the Goodman Project. He said, I want you to talk about that Goodman Project stuff. And so I talked about mental health, and I talked about authenticity, and I talked about how, writing for the Goodman Project actually made me a much better storyteller, and writer. And I think that's what really writing briefs and arguing is about, right? Telling a good story. And those are really important skills. But, at the time when I was an associate, I was like, there's no way I can tell anyone, I'm publishing this stuff, but there's no way I would share something I wrote at work or say, hey, I'm working on this thing. Because because in my associate brain, I thought the partner would say, well, why weren't you here billing more hours? Why are you writing about sports?
Hmm.
But meanwhile, and so I hid that part of myself. I also, of course, like hid the mental health part of myself that I no longer do. But I think all those things kind of make us, who we are, and I think there's value in sort of being yourself. So, and I think a lot of this push is coming from like that younger generation. But I think,
Yes.
we have to do a lot as leaders to sort of promote that sort of cultural change, because it's not
Yes.
it's not oppositional to being a good lawyer or making a lot of money. I think you can be a good lawyer and do great work and make a lot of money and not just like shred through people and have people hide themselves. I think it's actually like a win-win-win. But I think it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Well, as leadership changes, as the older leaders, not just to make it a generational issue, but I think as some of the older leaders cycle out, and you get some of the newer folks like yourself, who where this way of being is more natural, um, that hopefully that, and I think it already is
Yeah.
beginning to change. But what I do hear from a lot of my lawyer clients, is, especially the younger ones, is the lack of mentorship. I mean, some of these firms speak a good game and say, yeah, here's your mentor, but it's not it's not something that these associates can count on. But not only that, not only just the lack of mentorship, but the lack of, I've heard it described, and I love this. You may have heard this: a board of directors, which is
Hmm.
folks, your support system, people that you can reach out to. Doesn't just have to be lawyers, but different types of folks who you reach out to for different types of things. Like there might be there might be someone, and you may be able to relate to this. I know I do. I have certain people who I know, if I'm needing just to vent, I
Yeah,
mean, certainly I have my partner Stephanie, but out of my friends, if I need to just vent, there's someone who I know I can go to,
yeah,
who is
that's
real
really important.
nurturing and listener. Then there's somebody else who I know is going to help me just get right in and fix a problem. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah, you have to have a big diversity that that network. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so true. But yeah, I mean, what you talked about is so talking a good game versus actually doing it, like, and that's the part where change is slow. And I mean, you see it in all these kind of institutional areas, right? We wish we were like further along than we are, and they're hard problems to solve because they're institutional and because they're really ingrained. Like the ideas about masculinity really ingrained, ideas about race and gender are really ingrained, ideas about culture and mental health are really ingrained. So it takes a large push to change it, and I think it has to come from not only the top down but the bottom up. But I think the bottom up is not insignificant. And I was having
No.
conversations with my peers, when they see that the younger generation, saying no, and on one level, they're like, I can't believe that kid said no and he's going to do it this way. And but part of it is, I mean, and I've had conversations where they're like, I'm jealous. Like I didn't realize, like I certainly didn't do that when I was that person's age.
Yes.
But I didn't realize I had that choice. I didn't realize I had that power. And if I did, maybe I would have, and I would have taken care of myself. Because frankly, if I have a superstar associate who needs more time or has some issue, like I want to nurture that person because that person's going to be really great to work with and they're going to help me, do great work. And so, rather than burning through that person, I want to be sensitive. And if they communicate to me, I can always
Right.
make other arrangements. If it means that they're not going to do the next draft, but I have to do the next draft, that's fine. But there's of course, at the what happens is at the margins, clients are come in and they have expectations and they have deadlines, and you got to get something done. And usually I think it's like it's really a leadership and issue, it's a management issue. What happens, I'll tell you one story from my past, but I think what happens is the people who are the leaders, the partners, they get anxious and nervous and they push too hard. It's because they didn't quite plan it out and they're under a
Yes.
time crush and they push all that down onto someone else. And that's of course very natural, and it's certainly not unique to law. But I really enjoyed my first law job at Kirkland and Ellis. I worked with really smart people. I did really like interesting work on big cases. I got great experience early. I got to take depositions and write briefs and travel and work on interesting cases. But I left Kirkland after my daughter was born because I was called because my then wife, gave birth on a Friday, and she was in the hospital. And I got called by the partner I was working with to come into the office on Saturday. Um, and it's not oh, Mike's lazy, like he doesn't work hard, and it's not oh, Mike, isn't doing his job, didn't get his work done. He was traveling on the Sunday. I had always traveled previously with him. He didn't know how to make his own travel arrangements. He didn't know how to get from the airport to the place. He didn't know, how to organize his documents, and he had a lot of anxiety about it. So when I said, I can't come to the office right now because my wife's in the hospital and I'm in the hospital, he said, well, I really need you to come in. And I did.
Wow.
And then,
Wow.
and then I realized, I don't want to be that. And that's had a lot of influence in kind of how I lead and how I try and treat associates.
Yeah.
And it also had a lot of influence on my career path because I left. And thought,
How long did it, when how long after that did you leave?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you left, you decided to leave the firm right away after that experience.
Yeah, because I looked forward and I was like, if I do really, really well, and this,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be unfair to him either.
Mm-hmm.
He was, dealing with stress and deadlines, but
Mm-hmm.
he had a young kid and he was billing an amount of hours that if I told you and you did the math, like you wouldn't even understand how it was
Right.
possible. And so when I thought at that time with a newborn baby and with my son was 2, and 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 I have no problem working hard. I like working hard. I like doing good work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but but to have it be constant for like no reason, was problematic. And so,
So that
I
was
looked to the
really
future. Yeah, it was a
yeah,
really defining moment because I looked and I said,
right,
okay, I'm doing well, and they're telling me I'm doing well, and if I continue to do well, I'm going to become that guy. And that guy like never sees his kid. And he bills like
right,
$3,000 a year, and he's stressed.
right.
And I was like,
It's like, what am I
there's
doing
no amount
here?
of money. There's just no amount of money.
Yeah.
And so, so I went to a different place where I thought I could also do interesting work
And
and
and I
have
and I
better
do see
balance.
that happening. I do see younger lawyers more able, or even to consider something like that,
Hmm.
um, quicker maybe than years ago.
Yeah, I think
When
that's true.
looking at lifestyle and quality of life, and I have my some of my younger clients too will say no and set limits with the partners.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm impressed with that, to be honest. I mean,
I'm
and they
impressed
do it,
too.
and they do it respectfully, and they do it thoughtfully. But they do set some limits. And I want to throw out or shout out. You mentioned law schools, that you're talking to law schools, and the last podcast. Well, we just dropped a new one, but two podcasts ago or two guests ago, we had Shalini George, who's
She's
a
doing
professor
tremendous
at
work.
Suffolk University Law School, and she's doing some great work um, at that law school. She's even teaching a pilot class just around well-being
Exactly.
issues, and that they're giving her space to do that. So there's definitely thing. I went to law school in the 80s,
Yeah,
and now to be fair, we did have a counselor there, which I was pretty progressive, I think, back in the 80s to have a
yeah, for
counselor.
sure, for sure.
Um, so I want to bring you back to the lawyering while human,
Yeah,
and what is what's your mission? What's your goal? What's your vision
yeah. So
for the lawyer? And is it a website or is it a blog or what exactly? What is
yeah,
it? How is it
so
packaged?
sure. I am still working on the website. I've been
Okay.
busy doing the lawyering part more, but I'm pretty active on this on socials, and I can give you that information. But I'm on Instagram and Twitter and
Yeah, we'll
Facebook.
have that. We'll have that
Um,
with the podcast
but
notes.
but the vision, and so I think there's really two components to it. One part of it is the sort of longer term culture change that I'm talking about, and I think the pathway into this conversation. Like I said, I think a lot of people have a misconception about that when we're talking about mental health and wellness. We're either talking about going to the gym or doing yoga or being really really sick, and I think that it's what I want to talk about is it's just an integral part of being a lawyer, and I really, really believe that the pathway in, the reason that everyone should care about this stuff, and I think like Professor George is modeling that at Suffolk by integrating it into a 4 credit course in law school. That this
Yeah.
is part of your personal and professional development. It's going to make you a better lawyer, and so the way in, why people should care about this, even if they don't suffer from depression or whatever, is this is a leadership competency. I think that if you're going to be a leader in a law firm or in an in-house, if you're going to be in this world, 9 out of 10 people have know someone either themselves are dealing with this or a family member. If you're leading people, and our business is all about people, right? That's we're a good law firm because of our people and their brains and their ability to do good work. So if you're going to be a leader, I think today you have to care about and be able to navigate this stuff. And if you want to foster innovation and creativity and be the creative problem solvers that great lawyers need to be, you need to have an infrastructure, and a firm culture and policies that support this. So part of what I'm talking about. So I want to talk to, and I am talking with law students and law schools on one level, and lawyers and law firms on another
And
level,
leaders.
and leaders about these issues. And some of it I can do on my own. It's sharing my own experience and my own insights. And for example, and that's kind of the long game. But I also think in the short term, from being out, from dealing with depression and anxiety over a long period of time, both as an associate and as a partner, and from kind of having almost every job you could have in the law. Like I've been a law clerk, and I've been an in-house lawyer, and I've been at a small firm, and a medium firm, and a large firm, and I've been, an associate. I've been a paralegal, and now I'm a partner. I feel like having gone through that, I think I can help law firms and lawyers to arrive at policies and structures and programming and education, and sort of build a culture
So,
like kind of the nuts and bolts stuff.
so do you see
Um,
yourself being a consultant in that kind of
yeah, I
role at
mean,
some point?
I do, and I think the way. So right now, I'm navigating this like I'm really enjoying being a lawyer,
Yeah.
and I'm building this while I'm doing it, and it's very integrated, and it's great. And but I think when I look at the law world, what I see really big, and I'm talking about law firms, and look at them first because I think that's where I have the most experience personally. But I see big firms, the really, really big law firms, like for example, Kirkland and Ellis, where I worked, or Quinn Emanuel, or the very large firms. Those firms are hiring wellness directors, right? And you said, "Oh, it's great, it's
Yes.
great," and it's great. I've met a lot of those people, and I think it's a wonderful development. But I think if only those big law firms, which are in many ways like the hardest places to work culturally, right? Have that resource. I think it's great that they're thinking about it, and those people are doing tremendous work. But it's sort of in the very narrow top level, that level. And being at a firm of the size of Wigan and Dana, where we're 150 lawyers, which in law firms makes you like medium size. I think there's a vast middle layer, and then of course, like there are many small law firms, and
Yeah.
and those places maybe don't have the resources or ability to hire a full time person. So one thing one thing I think I could add is to sort of be an outsourced, whether you call it a consultant or an outsourced director of wellness. But I
Hmm.
think I could help firms in that middle layer to set up their wellness programs, to bring in people to do these things, to work on their actual policies and structures and internal groups, to kind of build the type of culture that we're talking about. And I think, if I'm able to do that through Lawyering While Human, myself, and bringing in others to do that, I think that we could reach a lot more people more broadly. So that's kind of my hope.
I love that idea. I think
Thank
that's really, I'm not sure anybody else is doing that right now.
Yeah,
But
I don't think anyone else is doing it right now. And
it's a great idea.
thank you.
And you do, I think you're right. You come very uniquely qualified,
Strangely
both
enough.
in terms, I think your own story certainly, your own personal story certainly helps you in this work. It's not just an abstract thing for you, and the fact that you've come out the other side, but also um, the work is never done.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
as you've said, you've had bouts with depression. Now each time
For
you
sure.
have more tools each
Exactly.
time it comes up, which is great. And you still have a therapist, which I, of course, as a therapist, think that I recommend that for everybody. Um, and you're just, I love, I'll go back to what you said before, which I really liked, which was very forward thinking and long term thinking. When you said, if I have an associate who's really good, and the last thing I want to do is burn him out or burn her out.
Yeah.
So that's very thoughtful way to think about. Not only is it good, I mean, listen, I would love if everyone made decisions based on, altruism. And if that's not enough, think about, well, how is this good for the firm? How is this good
Right.
for our clients?
Exactly.
You want someone who is working on all cylinders, right?
Yeah, and I think what's inspiring is, there is. I think there's a lot more top-down leadership is needed, and I hope to have a role in that. Law firms. If you take a cynical view of law firms, which many do, and I understand why, law firms don't often make gigantic changes without it making
No.
monetary sense.
Hmm.
And if you look at the pro bono and diversity sort of pathways, when clients started demanding stuff, law firms changed. And I think it's interesting.
Such as diversity.
Well, yeah, and I think it's
Yeah.
very parallel. And I think what's inspiring to me is, for example, I came across a fellow in the UK. and he's running an organization called the Mindful Business Charter. His name's Richard Martin. And that was started by some very large companies in England, HSBC and Lloyd's of London, basically saying, we recognize that we're gigantic clients and that when we send an email to our law firm, they run around like chickens without heads and drop everything. And that's actually not great for us. It's not good for us. It's not good for them. And so we want to actually, so it actually started from clients.
Wow.
And so
Interesting.
a number of companies and law firms have signed up to that mindful business charter. Again, I think it suffers
Wow.
from that sort of mindfulness buzzword in its title, but what it really is some of these concepts and sort of building in these concepts to culture about how we communicate when we send emails. And I think it's interesting to see it coming from. I think it's really really progressive to see it coming from that direction, and really hopeful because that's
So this
the
is coming
direction it's
from
pushing.
the companies, from clients, not from
Yeah.
the firms,
Well, that's
law
how it
firms.
started, but a number
Hmm.
of firms and companies have signed up to this mindful business
Interesting.
charter to
Huh.
sort of try and do business in accordance with these principles. But yeah, I
Okay.
think more of that is kind of needed to push us to where we need to go. But I do
Yes.
think it makes business sense. In fact, uh, I'm working on an article on the business case for well-being in law, and others have uh, before me written tremendous law review articles on it, but I'm working on an article to say like, look, this actually makes economic sense. If you look at it, and I think that's an important kind of piece to the conversation if we're really talking about these big
Yes.
changes.
All right. We just have 3 or 4 minutes left, but I do want to ask you about the hashtag We Rage for Love. What? Tell me more about that. What was that about?
So it started. I wrote an article for the Good Men Project
Uh-huh.
during the either the Trump campaign or his presidency, and it was really talking about kind of like the intensity that people need to push for important social change, and then
Hmm.
it's really for love. And it really came. It came
Uh-huh.
from a quote where someone was basically saying, like, if we fought as hard for the beliefs that we have on the issues that we care about, as for example, the NRA fights for guns, that's kind of the passion you have to bring for it. But it's
Yeah.
not, it's for love. Like it's coming from a good place, but you have to
Right.
fight like it's everything to you, like
Yes.
it's your
Yes.
reason for being, and so that was sort of came from a political place,
Yeah.
but it was talking about kind of that, yeah. And then the other hashtag you mentioned, not weak just human, was a really important
Yes.
one to me. That came out of the Goodman Project. Not only puts out articles, I think 40 articles a day on a range of topics, but also interactive. So I helped to create this program there called social interest groups, where every night of the week you have a phone call. It's actually it's like a podcast, or it's an interactive podcast where all the callers are involved in the conversation, and they have conversations on race and gender. And I actually led one on mental health for a while. And in addition to having a group to talk about, we wanted to do something out in the world, and we did a video, sort of a public service announcement to try and sort of destigmatize, to say, we're not weak, just human, and had different people from different walks of life sort of talking about themselves and the issues that they were dealing with.
And this is through the Good Men Project?
Yep, that was all through the
So
Goodman Project.
folks, and is that still going on, or is it that's
Still writing about mental health for the Goodman Project. I wrote an article just last week.
but I mean that not weak, just human, where people were calling the way you described as
So
people
the
calling
hashtag,
you or
yeah, the hashtag is
yeah.
still in use right
Yeah.
now. There's not a mental health social interest group going right now. The ones we
Okay.
have are environment, race,
Okay.
gender, and relationships.
Got it.
But they kind of come in cycles, and there'll probably be a mental health one again. And
But people can
yeah,
find out about that going to the website.
yeah, you can go to the
Find out
Goodman
about all
Project,
that.
and you can search
Okay.
on Twitter for that hashtag. You'll find a bunch of stuff.
And then you're going to have Lawyering While Human is going to have a website soon down the road.
Yep. It will be
For,
at www.lawyeringwhilehuman.com. There is a placeholder up there, but right now I'm sharing content every day on Instagram and Twitter,
yes. And LinkedIn as well, right?
and LinkedIn. LinkedIn, it's just me, Mike Kasdan,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
on those other places, on Twitter, it's at law_while_human. And on Instagram, it's at zen.mayhem, actually, which is a term I
Zen.mayhem.
sometimes use to describe myself. And it's been my longtime fantasy baseball name that I turned into that. So,
Ah,
and I'm also on Facebook. There's a group called Lawyer While Human. It's an open public group where, I'm just sharing articles, sharing content, thoughts, memes, that
yeah.
kind of stuff. It's kind of been fun to build community that way, connect to different law firms and law schools and folks out there.
Well, you're doing fantastic work, Mike. Really, I think I don't want to be trite and say the conversations need to happen. More than conversations need to happen for sure, and you are doing more than conversations, but you're putting it out there. You're also modeling vulnerability and authenticity and congruence. Am I saying that right?
I'll take it. You're saying nice things about me. I'll take it.
I'm having a moment here. I'm not sure I pronounced it. Anyway, you're being congruent. There you
Thank you.
go. And that's hugely important. That
Yeah,
kind of
well,
modeling
thank you.
and being a
Thank you.
good leader. The folks who work at your firm, the associates, especially the young associates, are lucky to have you. So that's where change happens.
Yeah, no, thank you. I
And
appreciate that. And I'm grateful for kind of falling into the Good Men Project. And it's interesting you mentioned about the conversation. And I think it is important to start the conversation, and it's really important to actually, you have a
action.
action. But the tagline
Yeah.
for the Goodman Project always has been and still is the conversation no one else is having. And
Mm,
on issues
yeah.
like diversity and inclusion and race and
Yeah.
gender and mental health, like more people are having it, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I kind of love that tagline, and it's kind of an inspiration to kind of bring the conversation as a first step, to more people.
When we do our workshops, when we used to do them in person in the room, we'd have lawyers come up to us, and our programs are on ethics, but it's more around the impact of stress on ethical decision making,
Sure.
and we do well-being programs, etc. But we'd often have lawyers come up and say, "I am just glad to hear that I'm not the only one,"
Yeah.
because we're very interactive, so they hear from each other, and just that is very. If that's just the only takeaway for lawyer attending the program, that's huge
Yeah. I
because they
agree. That's a
know
big deal.
that there are other people out there who are struggling. Of course, that's not the last step. That's the first step to feel like I'm not alone, and that in and of itself helps folks feel better. But then it's of course, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah.
What kind of tools can I use to help me get to a better place?
Yeah, yeah, and even though, like I said, these are big, slowly changing problems, I am inspired and hopeful because more people are talking about it. I had an experience 3 years after I had depression where I met people I used to work with who were senior to me, and I described what had happened. I thought I was telling this big secret. This thing happened to me. I didn't know what was happening, and they were both like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that happens to us all the time," but nobody
Yes.
talked about it. So
No.
being out and seeing more people
Yes.
talk about it now, I think
Yes.
gives us a chance. It gives us a chance.
Yes. And telling your story, I do a lot of work with clients who are dealing with grief and loss. And telling your story is often what folks who are grieving want to do, to talk about the person who died. And
Sure.
often when they do, that's what happens. The person they're telling will say, "Yeah, I lost my child too," or
Yeah.
"Yeah, I had a miscarriage too." So it's just opening up leads to connection, and that connection is just so critical.
Yeah.
And we're not getting as much as we need, particularly during the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
agree. Oh, yeah, I'm a big storytelling person. I believe that
mhm,
like storytelling is like the path to social change and on all these topics, right? Because it's connection, and that's what all the stuff is about. Like you were talking about it, that opening up is a beautiful thing, and it's productive. Like you can actually move forward to a different place.
yes.
So yeah, I have a lot of hope for this and a lot of energy around it.
Well, Mike, thank you. I know you have a child to get at the airport soon, and I'm sure you're looking forward to that. So I want to end the interview now, but I really appreciate your giving me your time today, and I look forward to us staying connected.
Same here. Appreciate your time, and thanks for inviting me on. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming back and listening. We'll have another interesting interview down the road. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. We love hearing from our loyal listeners, so please feel free to email us any questions, comments, suggested topics, or guest recommendations at the following address: feedback@thrivinglawyerspodcast.com. The Thriving Lawyers Podcast is brought to you by Real-Time Creative Learning Experiences, a national provider of continuing legal education and professional development programs that leave participants engaged, encouraged, and equipped to pursue meaningful and sustainable change in their practices, their lives, and the organizations they work in. And by Osborne Conflict Resolution, your experienced guides through the uncharted terrain of business and family law disputes, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Thriving Lawyers Podcast.